Hey kids, what's up? It's Mr. Stanley, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about Hudson's glorious past. And in order for us to know a little bit about early Hudson, we're going to have to go back in history a little bit. And the history that I wanted to take you to was a long time ago. We're going to go to a country across the Atlantic called England. And we're going back almost 300 years here. And in England at the time, their country was not ruled by a president, but they were ruled by a king and a queen. And the king and the queen made rules which people lived by, and they had to obey. Came a time when the king and queen put out rules that they seemed a little bit unfair, and they seemed harsh to the people that lived there in England. So, these rules that they wanted to tell people, they wanted to tell them how to pay their taxes, and they wanted to tell them that they were going to have to be told where to go to church on Sundays and how to worship. And you know what? How do you think that those people felt? Well, they didn't feel very well about it. And many of them felt the way that many of you guys might feel the same way, to be told what to do all the time. So they were really angry and frustrated. So there were a couple of different ways to handle that situation. You could be really angry at that, and you could be really unhappy for a long time, and you might want to have some change. Well, the citizens of England, they decided that they wanted to make a change, and they wanted to be in charge of their own lives. So they decided to leave England, and they set up a new life and new rules and hopes for themselves. Well, how did they travel from England to the New World? How did they get there? Well, let's take a look at this map. Okay, so they traveled across the great body of water called the Atlantic Ocean. And in order to do that, they needed boats. And they packed up lots of supplies to travel to the new land. And when they arrived on the eastern coast of the new land, they landed right up in here. Okay. And over time, as the settlements began to grow, it was important, just like we have talked about in class for our own constitution, to come up with an order and civility. So little did they know, back in England, the king and queen, they were really upset that they left. And the king and queen were putting together an army led by General Cornwallis. And they wanted to come over and declare war to show how angry they were. Lucky for the people in these 13 colonies right here. And as you can see, kind of look a little different than what they do today. But they heard of this. They heard of the plan. So they pick a general that they feel that's equally as talented to lead their army. And his name was General George Washington. And he was chosen to lead this talented group. And they had a war that started in 1775. As you can see on this one, which started something called the Revolutionary War. And if you're thinking about 1783, you're thinking correctly, because now this war was called the Revolutionary War. And at the end of the war, one side was the winner, and that was the colonies. Back in those days, the side that was defeated the general had lost his surrender, and he had to give his sword to the winning side, which I thought was kind of neat. But both sides met in a neutral location to meet up and agreed for surrender. And then they came up with something called the Treaty of Paris. The official surrender, the document gave people the colonies freedom in all the land that stretched all the way over here to the Mississippi River, which is right here. And this opened up a lot of new land and exciting opportunities for the people. And one such person that got this opportunity was a man by David Hudson. And he lived in one of these 13 colonies right up here called Connecticut. And he lived in a small town called Goshen, Connecticut. Now, one of the streets in Hudson is named after that town, Goshen Drive. It's in the subdivision in Connecticut Colony. And David Hudson was a dairy farmer in Goshen, Connecticut, and he lived a very happy life. When he heard the opportunity of this land from the Treaty of Paris. He was really excited. There was a group of men formed by the state of Connecticut to go out and survey the land that Connecticut was entitled to. So this company was called the Connecticut Land Company. And here's a picture of David Hudson here in case you, it's kind of a drawing. And I think I actually have another picture. Oh, here's another actual kind of painting, more detailed painting. And what happened was it was this Connecticut Land Company, when they started to divide up this land here, it was actually led by a man by the name of Moses Cleveland. Sound familiar? And these men were called surveyors, and they had to divide up this land into equal little pieces or parcels. And the land they surveyed was stretched from east to west all the way to the Mississippi. And the section that David Hudson was most interested in was the part that stretched across northern Ohio up here. And the surveyors divided up the Connecticut's land into 5 miles by 5 miles. So 5 times 5 is 25. So it's 25 square miles. Moses Cleveland and his men brought back the completed map of Connecticut, and citizens of Connecticut who were interested in buying this land were encouraged to participate in this land auction. Now, David Hudson was so interested. He studied the map of Ohio, and he wanted to choose his parcel or his section wisely. And here is a picture of his of the map that he was given. And what he wanted something near water. He also wanted for transportation. He also wanted some land for crops. And he also wanted to make sure that this land was big enough for him to do the things that he did. Because he was a dairy farmer, he needed space and farmland for his cows and water for making cheese, and also an easy way to get there from Connecticut. So if you take a look here, this is the trip that he would have had to take from Goshen, Connecticut, all the way here. And we'll talk about, in the next segment, we'll talk about a little bit why he had to take this route as opposed to a straight line. And you could probably think about or wonder why possibly that is. So what he did was he wanted to find a spot. And the spot that he found was a spot called Range 10, Town 4. So if you've ever played the game Battleship, he was kind of looking at this kind of like the Battleship. So towns go from 1 all the way up here to 13. And then ranges go all the way from 1 all the way to 24. So if you wanted to go to Cleveland and buy up a section of Cleveland, named after Moses Cleveland, you would go to Range 12, and then you'd go all the way up to Town 8. So Range 10, Town 8 is Cleveland. Take a look at Akron. Akron is Range 11, Town 2. Now, David Hudson, he picked Range 10, Town 4. And as you can see, it's a perfect square on the map. And it's still today, even if you Google Map Hudson, Ohio, you'll notice that it is pretty much a square. So David Hudson here, he purchased that land, and he was really excited to buy this land. But you know what, though? He didn't just go ahead and do it. He had to ask for permission. You wonder who he had to ask? That's right. He had to ask Mrs. Hudson. And she obviously gave him her blessing. And he didn't quite have all the money to purchase this land. So he had to ask some of his friends, and he had to borrow some money. So they were really excited about it. And they loaned him some money, and they went in together to buy the land. So he went to the auction, and he was excited to get the new land. He felt that his oldest son, Ira, who was 11 years old at the time, he wanted to take him with him, would be the best plans. But he needed to also get permission from Mrs. Hudson to do that. And she thinks that this long and hard road wasn't really a great idea, but she gave him permission and the promise to keep him safe. So Mr. Hudson agrees to this promise, and David starts planning for Ira's and his departure. And he knows that he needs supplies to get to go with him on their trip, establishing his new settlement in Range 10, Town 4. So as we looked on the map here before, they're going to make this trip. Okay, and there's a reason why they have to make this trip. Now, I want you to think about that long time ago. I mean, we don't have cars, we don't have airplanes, we don't have really fast and fancy ways to get there. And as a matter of fact, we don't even have roads yet. So, really, all that we have are just horses and wagons. There's really not much else other than walking, anyways, to get there, and maybe a boat. So, I want you to think about what things that they would need to pack in order to get there. Okay, they probably would only take the things that they would need. Maybe one set of clothes or two. They probably would take just enough food for them to eat. Obviously, they would have to hunt or fish in order to eat food. What little that they could pack with them. So this route that they took from Goshen, Connecticut, all the way to Range 10 Town 4, they had to go to New York because part of the reason that they needed to go all the way up here to Bloomfield was because his business, Mr. Hudson's business partners, lived in Bloomfield, New York. So they went there. He lent him some money, and they wanted to get some supplies there for the rest of the trip. It was a nice, almost halfway meeting place. So they would need a lot for this trip. And his neighbors called they were traveling only with another group called the Lacey's. It was a family called the Lacey's. And their children were also expected to be going on this trip. So they felt that they could take care and protect Ira as well. It was in Bloomfield that David Hudson met the two men to help them with their trip west. Now, I'm going to stop the story there because the story kind of gets tricky from here on out because things start to go a little bit crazy and not as planned. So I'll leave our story there today, and we'll continue on with David Hudson's trip, part two, the next time we meet.